My whole life I had been afraid of doing what I knew needed to be done, afraid to give all of myself to the battle. The helmet showed me that my codes and rules were naive, that all that truly mattered was victory, and now I would finally take it for myself. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, the Collect and Connect Merciless. Bruce Wayne is the Merciless, the Batman of Earth -12. He gained the powers of Ares after donning the War God's helm, which gave him an insatiable drive to fight. He eventually joined the Dark Knights, a team of evil Batman from alternate realities. Before we feast our eyes on the Merciless, obviously the first thing we're going to do, as we do with all these other reviews, is figure out how tall the figure stands. Where are you going with that tape measure? Asks somebody at the back of the crowd. Well, asking that, sir, will give you the answer of, I'm measuring actually right up here, because that is the tallest point of the figure after all. I could measure it technically here, but that's not really the highest point. So right here. That's where we're landing the tape measure for this review, revealing that the Merciless Collect and Connect figure from this wave stands 9.35 inches in height. Switching that to centimeters, then you're looking at the figure standing 23.7 centimeters tall. My apologies to the man in the back. I may have been a little abrupt with that answer. Showing you what he looks like stacked up with the rest of the figures from this particular wave. Last figure we had a look at was Superman the Infected, so you can see how he stacks up with that. We can also bring in the Batman Who Laughs. We can also bring in Batman, which again, I have to just remind everybody that Batman is supposed to be shorter than Superman. Not necessarily the case. And we can also bring in one of the Robins. I know I keep just bringing in the exact same Robin every single time instead of bringing in all three of them, but it kind of gives you at least an idea of how the figures stack up with one another. Could Merciless be a little bit taller? Yes. Could the Robins be shorter? Yes. But still, we got ourselves quite the ragtag bunch of cool-looking characters in the Merciless wave here. The Collect and Connect Merciless does come included with an accessory, a big, giant, broad sword. You can see some real interesting looking carvings that they've done to the plastic molding here. Very super cool. I believe this is simply just molded gold plastic. I don't think they've actually gone in and painted this. Even the place that normally would be scraped, because I keep putting it into the Merciless's hands and then removing it, this area isn't scraped either. So again, I just believe it's molded gold plastic, but it does have some really interesting looking detailing done to the blade as well as to the hilt as well. To get this into either one of his hands can be a bit of a struggle, simply just because he has really hard plastic for his hands. One good thing is, at least, because this isn't painted, I don't feel like I have to be as careful forcing the handle of the hilt into his hand. Right there. And you can see he holds it perfectly fine. One good thing with the hands being so closed shut, or closer of a grip, is that the handle doesn't seem like it wants to fall off. So you're not going to get a really super loose sword in Merciless's hand. Now, of course, comes the fun part of actually just removing that back out. Just twist that off. Well, it's a lot easier than I thought it would be. Taking that off and getting a closer look at Merciless. Definitely a worthy candidate, I feel, for a Collect and Connect figure. If you're going to be giving us a Collect and Connect figure, put in an invested interest in this so that when we get this figure finally built, there's some sense of not only accomplishment, but the fact that you finally have yourself a pretty cool looking figure that you can put on display. Again, apologies for the fact that it took me so long to actually get through this wave. I beelined it with a capital B when we looked at Bane, finished that wave off first, and then I, of course, had to go back and finish up the rest of these reviews. And boy, I'm so glad that I did. Merciless is a fun-looking figure. Of course, based on a really cool design and backstory of Batman. Getting Ares' armor in the comics sort of results in getting Batman looking and resembling like this. Of course, you've got the Wonder Woman emblem there encased inside of a Batman emblem, which is a nice touch. Some super cool detailing on this guy. To play devil's advocate, I suppose, also looking at this figure, there is always room for improvement, even though I did really say that other Batman in this wave was a perfect Batman. But in case here of Merciless, yes, there's definitely, I think, room for improvement. As good as this sculpt is, and as much as I love the metallic blue they decided to settle on, there is definitely an opportunity, I feel, to add some much-needed washing of dark coloring, preferably maybe even black, to, I feel, really bring out some of the details on this. Now, I mentioned in earlier reviews, I've seen some real talented artists on places like Facebook and Instagram posting pictures of what the figures they've taken from this wave and added some much needed depth and contrast with some washing of paint. It's just a little bit of washing really does, I would imagine, bring out a lot of the details on it, especially when you look at like the gauntlets on his arms. How cool are those now? How much cooler would they be if they just had a little bit of a dark contrasting wash? Sometimes it's just a matter of adding a little bit of a dark coat of paint. Very light, and then brushing it off can fill in some of those creviced areas and really accented some of the sculpting. Like this right here along the gauntlet would stand out, I feel, a lot more if they just added a black wash over top of it. You can kind of definitely see, even like by the lower end of it, how this would be right up Todd McFarlane's alley. He loves skulls, he loves chains, and of course when it comes to Merciless, he gets a little bit of both. This is very much something that you would expect to see on a Spawn character, even Spawn himself, with a little Spawn style of skull in the middle there, and then chains, of course, coming out from that, with a couple of nice little chains going all the way around the outer edges here as well. Now this is all softer plastic. They're not obviously using real chains in this application, just using a molded chain instead. I don't feel like, in this case, I don't feel like real chains necessarily had to come into play. Just molding this is perfectly fine. Because it'd be, especially when it comes to the articulation on this guy, if you had real chains, I think there would be a lot more working against the figure, and these could potentially break, of course, when it comes to moving these legs back and forth. When it comes to the assembly of the character, something else I want to talk about, I suppose before we do that, we should probably talk a little bit about that head sculpt. Could that not just be the coolest armor that Batman would be sporting for himself? The big front grille on the front here kind of looks like the grille of a truck with glowing red eyes there right on the inside. Now, I did say that this was light piped by the fact that they just used the... If I lifted the head up, which I don't want to because I know it's going to be difficult to put back into place, behind this head, behind there was actually a whole plate of red plastic. I'm not really sure why they ended up doing this. First, I thought it would have been light piping, but really, obviously, there's no place where you can access the light piping anyways. Even if you got a light source down in there, I don't think it would be nearly enough to touch that red. So I don't understand why they would have even put in a whole strip of red plastic, when you would think that just painting the red eyes would be a lot easier and simpler. But here's what I'm talking about here. You got a nice contrast of that dark colored wash added over top of those areas. Unfortunately, here is about the only area that gets it. All the rest of it is just kept to the coloring of the blue. And don't get me wrong, I'm loving the coloring and the molding of this guy. But I really think he really deserved a whole lot of accented colors just added to the surface of the plastic as well. Spin it around the back so you guys can see this fur mane that's along the back area of his armor. This is all softer plastic, whereas the rest of this is all a harder plastic. But some real exquisite details on the back. You can see some war-torn damage there on the back of his armor, some indentations, scratches, and just overall wear and tear, like I said, to that costume. It looks absolutely stunning. Talking a little bit about the construction of the figure, which I sort of sidelined when we started looking at the head sculpt here. It does have a few little issues I wanted to talk about, and it more so is specific, I think, to my figure, not across the board. While this arm isn't going to be giving me any issues, you can see I can hinge that out perfectly fine. I have noticed right from the get-go, this arm has been giving me problems. I don't know if it's just a super tight joint. What I can do on this side, I can't do on this side right here. When I move it too much or move it out, this arm has popped off probably like 5 or 6 times already now. It is in there, but I think what the problem is this little track joint right here, which of course allows the arm to hinge in and out, is so tight. It's so tight that every time I move that, this arm forces itself off the trackball, the ball joint socket on the inside of his torso. The other thing I really like about this figure, although it's still, I don't have it completely intact, is the way that they've hidden the articulation on the leg. The leg actually attaches. It's not even really articulation either. You can get a little bit going here. They've just added just a little bit of a groove in between, just to give you a little bit of slack, allowing you to move the legs. But the way that they've done it, they've lined it up with the same shape that's above it. I think that's smart, but in also a way, on the other end of it too, it does limit what you can do with the legs. You can't really turn them as much as you could if this was just a straight line across. Speaking of his articulation, it seems we're already talking about it anyways, his head rotates back and forth, but it is limited. It's limited by the sculpting of the head, but it's also limited by the fact he's got the collar piece the way it's designed. You can move the head up, you can move the head down, but when it comes to really rotating it back and forth, yeah, you are going to be pretty limited with what you can actually do. Moving our attention over to this side rather than this side here, his arm hinges out perfectly fine. He's got this cup socket joints that we've seen with all the DC Multiverse figures. Just be careful of these. I did mention at the beginning of these reviews that when you are putting the arms in, these cup joints aren't really attached to anything. And if you're not careful, you're not paying attention, this cup socket may not even actually be in the torso. May have actually just dropped it somewhere. So make sure it's there before you put the arms in. It does give you mileage when it comes to moving the arms forward and back. You can again move those arms out perfectly fine. The shoulder pads independently have their own ball joints, so that's nice. Stays out of the way. That's good. I like that. Single hinge on the elbow. Then, of course, when it comes to his hands, a little harder to kind of get in there because he's obviously got his hands behind the gauntlets here. But you can rotate the hands back and forth this way. He has an upper torso ball joint. He has a lower torso ball joint, a little more concealed because he's got the skirting going across that. And then when it comes to his legs split out. You can go forward and back on the legs. A little bit of a swivel on the top. But again, just by the way that it's designed, the swivel is actually working up here and not necessarily working here. Here you're getting very limited amount of it. He's got a single hinge on the knee. The lower leg does not appear to rotate. I thought it may have, but it actually only seems like it swivels more up the top here and not swivels down below, right there. His feet hinge back and forth. Just watch out for the little spike on the end of it. I keep pricking myself every single time I put my hand around his foot. But he's got these little sharp, almost like talon-like spikes on the end. Just be careful, like I said, when it comes to putting your hand down there. The toes move back and forth, and yes, he does have ankle pivot as well. As I said at the beginning of this review, sounding a bit like, I'm sure now, a broken record, he is a worthy candidate, I feel, as a perfect collect and connect figure. Whereas after all it's said and done, and as you've picked up all of the 4 figures, or another 2 if you decide to pick up the trio of Minion Robins, you at least feel some sense of accomplishment. Because not only did you get yourself great looking figures in this entire wave, but you do get yourself at the very end of it, a spectacular looking collect and connect figure that you can proudly put on display. With the older DC Universe figures that we religiously looked at on this channel because I was buying every single wave I possibly could, it was a lot easier back then to come up with the wave, say, top 10 favorite collect and connect figures because we had a lot more waves to choose from. With Todd McFarlane's DC Multiverse figures, on the other hand, we have a whole lot less to choose from because prior to this one, we did get ourselves a Bane, and prior to that, we did get ourselves a Collect and Connect Batmobile, which was slightly underwhelming just because it's a small Batmobile. What are you going to do with a little small version of the Batmobile? I don't even think he's even going to be continuing that trend. So our list is a lot smaller to choose from, resulting in my favorite figure so far that we've collected and connected in the DC Multiverse line for Todd McFarlane's figures. Merciless, I would say, by far is my favorite. Again, you're only really comparing it to Bane, and Bane was underwhelming. Bane could have been a better figure if I think he had better paint applications, and certainly if the veins were painted in. And because he doesn't have that, again, he sort of feels like he comes up a little bit shorter, literally and figuratively, to Merciless here, which I just feel is the more superior looking figure. This one isn't without, of course, its faults. It does have some difficulty getting pieces to assemble properly. I still have issues with his one arm, and I feel like his legs just don't properly stay in place. They seem like they're doing a fine job so far, but as I'm twisting the leg, I just feel like something's not adding up. I can't quite get that leg to stay properly in place. Maybe it's also for the fact I'm just looking at a big noticeable gap between the lower end of his leg and the top of his thigh. Maybe that's one of the things that's giving me that illusion that I don't feel like the leg is properly in place. But he overall is a nice built-looking figure. Good, solid, rich, metallic blue colors. Yes, of course, he probably could be afforded a little bit of an initial wash over top of it. Just think of how much better this figure could have looked if he just had a more of a darker coat of just a very thin coat of black paint over top of it. I've seen some real talented artists do the exact same thing with their Merciless, and the end result is some pretty spectacular looking work. I think this is definitely a basis for what you could do with the figure, because I really feel like this figure could have used a whole lot of additional coloring. The blue looks fantastic, but I think there's definitely a missed opportunity to not enhance the sculpting experience by just adding a little bit of coats, just a dark contrasting color, which unfortunately Merciless just doesn't have. But the rest of the sculpt is fantastic. He comes with a nice big broad sword to be displayed with, and he's tall and he's big, and that's the way he really should be for a collect and connect figure. Don't give us these measly little tiny things and call them collect and connect, or even call them bath figures, because Build-A-Figures have been somewhat embarrassing. Not lately, of course, but the few previous years, the Jubilee. Just want to remind everybody that we got ourselves a Build-A-Figure Jubilee. Obviously, we've gone a long way from then. And Todd McFarlane, I think so far, I think the line is in the proper hands, because based on what we've been getting so far, even though this is a slightly older wave, I've really been happy with this particular line and really feel like I was doing a disservice to it by not finishing up the reviews sooner than what I actually did. Needless to say, though, today we were having a look finally at the Build-A-Figure Collect and Connect, whatever you want to call it. We're finally looking at the imposing Merciless. What do you guys think of this figure down below in the comments section? Also, let me know down below what your favorite figure was. I know I technically already asked that earlier when we looked at the Superman Infected, but what is your favorite figure from the Merciless wave? You can even just say Merciless as well if you'd like. Also, if you're new to this channel and you're liking all the content you're seeing and you're glad to see that I finally did the review of Merciless, I know it did take a little bit longer than what I wanted it to be. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you turn the bell notification on. And yeah, by all means, come back to this channel Monday to Friday, 12 p.m. and as well 2 p.m. Sometimes we even do 3 videos a day. There's been a lot of content, I will admit, that I've been dumping up onto YouTube as of late, because it's just, in my defense, there's so many cool things to be looking at as of late. And if I only did to the 1 video a week or 2, 3 videos a week scheduling, it would take forever for some of these videos to actually see light of day. That's why we're actually posting as much as we are. But to make sure that you're not missing any of those new videos, hit the bell notification. That's your way of getting those reminders from YouTube that when new videos pop up, you'll get those pop-up notifications that say, yes, in fact, Review Spot's got something new on the brewing. He's brewing something on the kettle. He's brewing something on the stove. What's that saying they say? Brewing something on the stove? I could even just be coming up with a new saying. Brewing on the stove. We'll just leave it at that. Lots of stuff coming your way, guys. So as always, keep your peepers peeled to this channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.